The wagon lurched over frozen ruts, each jolt sending splinters of pain through Clara Hale's spine. She didn't flinch. Pain had become so ordinary these past months that it registered only as background noise, like wind, like hunger, like the dull ache of breathing. Her Uncle Cyrus sat beside her on the driver's bench, close enough that she could smell the whiskey soaking through his pores. He hadn't spoken in 3 miles. Neither had she. What was left to say? The November sky hung low and gray, pressing down on the mountain pass like a threat. Bare aspens clawed upward through the snow, skeletal and desperate. Clara pulled her shawl tighter, though it did nothing against the cold. The wool was thin, worn through at the shoulders. Everything she owned was worn through. "There," Cyrus said, jerking his chin toward a narrow gap between 2 ridges. "Another mile." Clara said nothing. "You'll do what he asks," Cyrus continued, not looking at her. "You'll work hard. You'll keep your mouth shut. You understand me." She understood. She'd understood since the morning he'd told her she was leaving. No discussion, no negotiation, just a flat statement delivered over burnt coffee. "I found a situation for you." As if she were a problem to be solved. As if the past 6 months of grief hadn't already solved her, broken her down into something small and manageable. Her daughter had been 4 months old when the fever took her. Emma. The name still lived in Clara's mouth like a stone she couldn't swallow. The tiny fists, the impossible softness of her skull, the way she'd smelled like milk and sunshine even when she was screaming. Gone. And then Richard, her husband, 3 weeks later. Thrown from a horse, neck broken, dead before sunset. The farm went to his brother. The house, the furniture, everything. Clara had been left with a trunk of clothes and a debt she couldn't pay. So Cyrus had paid it. Her mother's brother, a man she barely knew, who'd shown up at the funeral with his hat in his hands and pity in his eyes. He'd taken her in, fed her, let her sleep in the room above his shop. And now he was selling her. She didn't blame him. Not really. He was a poor man with 3 children of his own and a wife who looked at Clara like she was a ghost haunting their supper table. 6 silver coins was probably more than he'd see in a month. Maybe 2 months. The trees thickened as they climbed, pine now, dark and crowding. The track narrowed to barely more than a footpath. Clara's hands were numb inside her gloves, but she didn't tuck them under her arms. She just sat there, staring ahead at nothing. "He's not a bad man," Cyrus said suddenly. "Granger. Rough, maybe. But he won't hurt you if you do right by him." Clara almost laughed. Hurt her? What was left to hurt? The cabin appeared without warning, a low, dark structure wedged against the base of a cliff, half buried in shadow. Smoke rose from the chimney in a thin gray line. A single window glowed faintly. The place looked less like a home and more like something crouched and waiting. Cyrus pulled the wagon to a stop in front of a weathered porch. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then the door opened. The man who stepped out was taller than Clara expected, broad through the shoulders, wearing a heavy coat that made him look even larger. His face was hard to read in the dim light, all angles and dark beard, eyes hidden beneath the brim of his hat. Silas Granger. He stood on the porch, hands loose at his sides, and studied her with the same expression a farmer might use to evaluate a plow horse. "She cook?" he asked. "Yes," Cyrus said quickly. "And clean. Good with mending, too. Strong back. Won't complain." Granger grunted. He stepped down off the porch, boots crunching through the snow, and walked a slow circle around the wagon. Clara felt his gaze move over her, not leering, just assessing, calculating. "You sick?" he asked her directly. Clara met his eyes. They were gray, she saw now. Cold gray, like creek water in winter. "No." "You run off easy?" "No." "You got objections to hard work?" "No." He nodded, pulled a small pouch from his coat pocket, and tossed it to Cyrus without ceremony. It landed in her uncle's lap with a soft clink. "That's it then," Granger said. Cyrus's hands fumbled with the pouch, his relief so obvious it turned Clara's stomach. "You won't regret this, Mr. Granger. She's a good worker, real good. We'll see." Cyrus climbed down, went to the back of the wagon, and pulled out Clara's trunk. He set it in the snow with a thud, then stood there awkwardly, glancing between her and Granger like he expected someone to say something meaningful. No one did. Finally, Cyrus cleared his throat. "Well, I'll be going then." Clara didn't answer, didn't look at him. She heard him climb back onto the wagon, heard the reins snap, heard the wheels creak as he turned the horses around. And then he was gone, swallowed by the trees, and she was alone with a stranger who'd just bought her for the price of a decent rifle. Granger picked up her trunk like it weighed nothing and started toward the cabin. "Come on!" Clara followed. Inside, the cabin was smaller than it looked from the outside. One main room with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table, 2 chairs, a narrow bed against the far wall. A ladder in the corner led up to what must have been a loft. The air smelled like pine smoke and something else, something sour and unwashed. Granger set her trunk down beside the door. "You'll sleep there." He nodded toward a pile of blankets in the corner, near the fireplace. "Not a bed, just blankets on the floor." Clara nodded. "You'll cook 3 times a day, keep the fire going, mend what needs mending, clean when there's cleaning to be done. I've got traps to run, so I'll be gone most days, sometimes overnight." "All right. You stay out of the loft," he added, his voice hardening slightly. "That door stays locked. You don't go up there. You don't ask about it. Understood?" Clara frowned. It was the first thing he'd said that didn't sound like a work order. It sounded like a warning. "Understood," she said quietly. He stared at her a moment longer as if trying to decide whether she'd obey, then turned and walked to the far side of the room. He pulled a shelf aside, revealing a small cache of supplies: flour, salt, dried meat, a few tins. "Use what you need. Don't waste anything." Clara nodded again. Granger picked up his rifle from where it leaned against the wall, slung a pack over his shoulder, and headed for the door. He paused at the threshold, his back to her. "I'm not interested in conversation," he said flatly. "Do your work. Keep to yourself. We'll get along fine." And then he was gone, the door closing behind him with a heavy thud. Clara stood in the silence, her breath misting in the cold air. The fire crackled softly. Somewhere outside, a bird called, high and sharp and lonely. She walked over to the pile of blankets, knelt down, and spread them out. They smelled like mildew and old sweat, but they were thick. Warm enough, probably. She sat there for a long time, staring at the fire, feeling nothing, and then she heard it. Faint. So faint she almost missed it beneath the snap of burning wood. A sound from above, from the loft. A whimper. Thin, weak, barely human. A baby. Clara's breath stopped. She stood slowly, her gaze lifting to the ceiling, to the dark outline of the loft door barely visible in the shadows above the ladder. The sound came again. Quieter this time. A broken little cry that fractured into silence. Her heart slammed against her ribs. A baby. She crossed the room in 3 strides, her boots loud against the plank floor. She grabbed the ladder and climbed, fast, clumsy, her hands shaking. The door at the top was rough wood, no handle, just a simple latch. And a lock. A heavy iron padlock, old but solid, hanging from a hasp. She pulled at it uselessly. It didn't budge. "Hello," she called, her voice hoarse. "Hello, can you hear me?" Nothing. Then another sound, not a cry this time, just a faint, rasping breath. Clara pressed her ear to the door. The wood was cold against her skin. She could hear movement now, small, weak movements, the rustle of fabric, a tiny, desperate gasp. "I'm here," she said, louder now. "I'm right here. Can you hear me?" Silence. Her hands pressed flat against the door, as if she could push through it by will alone. Her mind spun. How long had the baby been up there? Why was it locked away? Was it sick? Injured? Dying? The word dropped into her mind like a stone into still water. She stumbled back down the ladder, her legs weak, her breath coming too fast. She paced the room, hands tangled in her hair. Think, think. Granger had said not to go up there. He'd said it like it mattered, like it was the one rule that couldn't be broken. But there was a baby up there. A baby. Clara's vision blurred. She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes, but the tears came anyway, hot, furious, unstoppable. Emma's face swam up through the darkness, the softness of her cheek, the way her tiny fingers would curl around Clara's thumb. Gone. But this one wasn't, not yet. Clara wiped her face with shaking hands. She looked around the cabin, taking inventory, thinking, calculating. Her gaze landed on the shelf Granger had moved earlier. She walked over, pulled it aside, and started searching. Flour, salt, dried venison, beans, coffee, tins of... There, behind a sack of cornmeal, a small wooden box. She pulled it out, flipped the latch, and opened it. Inside were tools: a hammer, a chisel, a file, a pair of rusted pliers. Her hands closed around the chisel. That's... She climbed the ladder again, slower this time. Her heart was still racing, but her mind had gone cold and clear. She wedged the chisel into the gap between the padlock's shackle and the hasp, braced her feet, and pulled. The metal groaned. She pulled harder, throwing all her weight into it. Her shoulders screamed. The wood cracked. The hasp ripped free. Clara shoved the door open and climbed into the loft. The smell hit her first. Thick, sour, wrong. Unwashed linens, sickness, despair. The space was tiny, barely big enough to stand in. A sloped ceiling, one small window covered with a scrap of cloth. And in the corner, a crib. Rough-built, splintered, barely more than a box. Clara crossed the room on her knees. Her hands gripped the edge of the crib, and she looked down. The baby was so small, so impossibly small. A boy, maybe 6 months old, though he looked younger. His skin was gray-pale, stretched tight over fragile bones. His eyes were half-closed, unseeing. His chest rose and fell in shallow, irregular gasps. "Oh," Clara breathed. "Oh, no." She reached down, her hands trembling, and lifted him out. He was light. Too light. His body was cold, his limbs limp. He didn't cry, didn't react. Just lay there in her arms, barely breathing. Clara pressed him against her chest, her hand cradling his head. She could feel his heartbeat, faint, uneven, stuttering. "No," she whispered fiercely. "No, you don't get to die. Do you hear me? You don't!" She carried him down the ladder, moving carefully, her entire body shaking. She set him on the pile of blankets near the fire and wrapped him tightly, layering the fabric around him, tucking it close. Then she grabbed a tin cup, filled it with water from the bucket by the door, and set it near the fire to warm. The baby's eyes cracked open, just a sliver, dull blue, unfocused. Clara dipped her finger in the warm water and touched it to his lips. He didn't respond. She tried again, letting a drop fall into his mouth. Nothing. "Come on," she murmured. "Come on, sweetheart. Just a little." She tried again, and again. Patient, persistent, refusing to stop. On the 5th try, his lips twitched. His tongue moved, barely, weakly, and he swallowed. Clara's breath caught. "That's it. That's it, baby." Again, she kept going. Drop by drop. Minute by minute. The baby's eyes stayed half open now, watching her with something that might have been awareness, might have been hope. Time dissolved. The fire burned low. Clara fed it more wood without looking away from the child. She lost count of how many drops she'd given him. Her arm ached. Her back ached. She didn't care. And then, slowly, impossibly, color began to creep back into his cheeks. His breathing deepened. His fingers curled. Clara's vision blurred again, but this time she was smiling through the tears. "There you are," she whispered. "There you are." She didn't hear the door open, didn't hear the heavy boots cross the floor, didn't notice anything until a shadow fell over her and a voice, cold, dangerous, cut through the room like a blade. "What the hell did you do?" Clara's head snapped up. Silas Granger stood above her, his face twisted with fury, his hands clenched into fists. And for the first time since she'd arrived, Clara felt something other than numbness. She felt rage. She stood, the baby still cradled in her arms, and met Granger's glare without flinching. "I saved him," she said. "Months." Granger stared at her, his jaw working, his eyes flicking between her face and the child in her arms. For a moment, Clara thought he might hit her. His whole body was coiled, trembling with barely restrained violence. "You had no right," he said, his voice low and shaking. "I told you not to go up there." "He was dying," Clara shot back. "What was I supposed to do? Leave him?" "Yes." The word hung in the air between them, brutal and unforgivable. Clara's grip tightened on the baby. "You locked him away. You left him to starve." "I didn't." Granger stopped, his hands raking through his hair. He turned away, paced to the far wall, then spun back. "You don't understand. You don't know—" "I know a dying baby when I see one." "He's been dying for weeks," Granger snarled. "Nothing works. Nothing helps. I've tried everything. Milk, broth, medicine, nothing. He just keeps fading. So I locked the door because I couldn't watch it anymore." His voice cracked on the last word. Clara stared at him, her anger faltering. For the first time, she saw past the hard edges, past the cold gray eyes and the clenched fists. She saw the exhaustion, the grief, the desperate, drowning hopelessness. "When did his mother die?" she asked quietly. Granger flinched like she'd struck him. He didn't answer. "How long ago?" Clara pressed. 2 months, he said finally, his voice flat. "Fever. She was gone in 3 days. And you've been taking care of him alone since then." "Trying to." He let out a bitter laugh. "Failing to." Clara looked down at the baby in her arms. His eyes were closed now, his breathing steady. His tiny fist had curled around the edge of the blanket. "He doesn't need medicine," she said softly. Granger's head snapped up. "What?" "He doesn't need milk or broth or herbs. He needs—" She paused, searching for the right words. "He needs someone to hold him, to talk to him, to make him feel safe." "That's insane." "Is it?" Clara met his gaze. "You said you tried everything. Did you try that?" Granger opened his mouth, closed it. His hands hung useless at his sides. "He's been grieving," Clara said. "Just like you. He lost his mother, and then you—" She stopped herself, softened her tone. "You couldn't give him what he needed because you were drowning in your own grief. So he started to fade, not from sickness, from loneliness." Granger stared at her. Then, slowly, his knees buckled. He sank onto one of the chairs, his head dropping into his hands. "I didn't know," he whispered. I thought I was doing everything right." Clara walked over and sat in the chair across from him, still holding the baby. "You were trying," she said. "That counts for something." They sat in silence for a long time. The fire crackled. The baby slept, his small body warm and solid against Clara's chest. Finally, Granger looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed, raw. "What's your name?" "Clara." "Clara," he repeated, as if testing the weight of it. Then, "His name is Jonah." Clara looked down at the sleeping child. "Jonah," she whispered. "That's a good name." Granger's gaze lingered on his son, something complicated and painful moving across his face. Then he stood abruptly, crossed to the shelf, and pulled out a bottle of whiskey. He poured 2 tin cups, slid one across the table toward Clara, and downed his own in one gulp. Clara didn't touch hers. "You should sleep," Granger said, his voice rough. I'll take him." "No." He frowned. "What?" "He's comfortable," Clara said. "Let him rest. I'll hold him." "You can't hold him all night." "Watch me." For a moment she thought Granger might argue, but then he just nodded, poured himself another drink, and walked over to the bed. He sat on the edge, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. Clara settled back in the chair, adjusting the blankets around Jonah. The baby stirred slightly, nuzzling against her, then stilled again. She didn't know what happened next. Didn't know if Granger would forgive her for breaking his one rule. Didn't know if Jonah would survive the night, or the week, or the winter. But for now, he was alive. And that was enough. Chess. Clara woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of wood being split outside. She blinked, disoriented, her neck stiff from sleeping upright in the chair. Jonah was still in her arms, still breathing, still warm. Pale morning light filtered through the window. She stood carefully, stretching the ache from her shoulders. The fire had been rebuilt, fresh logs, bright flames. A pot of coffee sat on the edge of the hearth, steaming. Outside, the rhythmic thunk of an axe hitting wood echoed through the clearing. Clara carried Jonah to the table and laid him gently on a folded blanket, then poured herself a cup of coffee. It was strong, bitter, scalding. She drank it anyway. The door opened. Granger stepped inside, his coat dusted with snow, his face unreadable. "You make it through the night?" he asked. "Yes." Granger nodded. He walked over to the table, stood there awkwardly for a moment, then reached out and touched Jonah's forehead with the back of his hand. The gesture was clumsy, uncertain, like he'd forgotten how. "He feels warmer," Granger said quietly. "He is." Granger pulled his hand back, shoving it into his pocket. "I'll bring in more wood, and there's venison hanging in the shed. You can make stew." "All right." He turned to leave, then stopped. "Clara." She looked at him. "Thank you," he said. The words came out stiff, unpracticed, but they were real. Clara nodded, and for the first time since she'd climbed into that wagon with her uncle, she felt something flicker in her chest. Not happiness, not hope, just possibility. Maybe this wasn't the end after all. Maybe it was the beginning. The stew was thin but hot, and Jonah managed 3 spoonfuls before exhaustion pulled him back under. Clara held him against her shoulder, one hand rubbing slow circles on his back, while Silas ate in silence across the table. The cabin was warm now, almost stifling, the fire stoked high enough to drive out the mountain cold that had settled into the walls. Silas scraped his bowl clean, then sat back and watched her. Not hostile anymore, but not exactly comfortable either, like he was trying to figure out what she was, now that she'd stopped being just a pair of hands he'd bought. "You said you lost a child," he said finally. Clara's hand stilled on Jonah's back. She hadn't said that, but she supposed he'd guessed. Anyone who'd held a dying baby the way she had last night, anyone who'd fought that hard, had their reasons. "A daughter," she said quietly. "Emma, 4 months old." Silas nodded slowly. "How long ago?" 6 months. The number felt wrong, too small. It should have been years, decades, long enough for the edges to soften. But it was only 6 months, and the wound was still raw enough to bleed if she pressed on it. "I'm sorry," Silas said. Clara met his eyes. They were softer now, though still guarded. "Your wife," she said. "What was her name?" "Catherine." "Were you married long? 3 years?" His jaw tightened. "Not long enough." They sat with that for a moment, two strangers bound by the same kind of loss, the same hollow ache that didn't have words. Then Jonah stirred, whimpering softly, and Clara stood. "He needs to sleep somewhere better than my arms," she said. "Is there a cradle? Something softer than that crib upstairs?" Silas hesitated, then pushed back from the table. "Yeah, I'll get it." He disappeared out the door, and Clara heard him rummaging in the shed. When he returned, he was carrying a small wooden cradle, simple but well made, the wood worn smooth from use. He set it down near the fire, then stepped back, his hands awkward at his sides. "Catherine made that," he said, "before Jonah was born." Clara ran her hand along the curved edge. The wood was warm, almost alive under her fingers. She could see the care in it, the sanded joints, the gentle rocking curve. Someone had loved this child before he was even here. She laid Jonah inside and tucked the blankets around him. He settled immediately, his breathing evening out, his small fist curling near his cheek. "He looks better," Silas said quietly. "He is better, but he's not out of danger yet." Clara straightened, brushing her hands on her skirt. "He needs to eat more. Small amounts, but often. And he needs to be held, talked to, kept warm." "I can do that." "Can you?" The question came out sharper than she meant it to, but she didn't take it back. "Because yesterday you had him locked in a room, waiting to die." Silas flinched. "I didn't know what else to do." "So you gave up?" "I didn't—" He stopped, exhaled hard through his nose. "You're right. I gave up. I couldn't watch him fade anymore, so I locked the door and pretended he wasn't there. You want to call me a coward? Go ahead. You'd be right." Clara studied him. The anger in his voice wasn't directed at her. It was turned inward, vicious and unforgiving. She recognized it. She'd carried the same thing after Emma died. The guilt, the certainty that she should have done more, seen something, changed something. "You're not a coward," she said. "You're just a man who lost too much at once." Silas looked at her, something raw and uncertain flickering across his face. Then he turned away, walked to the window, and stared out at the snow-covered clearing. "I don't know how to do this," he said quietly. "Do what?" "Be a father. I thought I did. When Catherine was alive, it seemed easy. She'd hand him to me, and I'd hold him, and it felt right. But after she died, everything went wrong. He wouldn't stop crying, wouldn't eat, wouldn't sleep, and I didn't know how to fix it." Clara moved to stand beside him. Outside, the trees stood dark and still against the white landscape. "You can't fix grief," she said. "Not yours, not his. You just have to live through it." "And if I can't?" "Then you do it anyway." Silas glanced at her, and for the first time, something almost like a smile ghosted across his face. "You're blunt." "I don't have the energy for anything else." He nodded, accepting that. Then he pushed away from the window and crossed to the shelf. "I need to check the traps. I'll be back by evening." He pulled on his coat, slung his rifle over his shoulder, then paused. If something happens while I'm gone, I'll handle it." Silas held her gaze for a moment, then nodded and left. The door closed, and Clara was alone with the baby and the fire and the silence. She poured herself another cup of coffee, sat in the chair by the cradle, and watched Jonah sleep. His face was still too pale, still too thin, but there was color in his cheeks now. Life. Her hand drifted to the edge of the cradle, rocking it gently. The motion was automatic, muscle memory from months of rocking Emma's bassinet. She thought that part of her was dead, buried with her daughter. But here it was, surfacing again, stubborn and aching and necessary. "You're going to be all right," she whispered to Jonah. "I promise." She didn't know if it was a promise she could keep, but she said it anyway. The days blurred together after that. Clara fell into a rhythm: wake before dawn, build up the fire, heat water for coffee and oatmeal, feed Jonah drop by drop until he could take more. She cleaned obsessively, scrubbing the floors, washing every scrap of fabric she could find, airing out the sour smell that had settled into the cabin's corners. She cooked stews and roasts and biscuits, using up Silas's stores faster than he probably liked, but he never complained. And she held Jonah, constantly. She carried him while she worked, propped against her shoulder or cradled in one arm. She talked to him, about nothing, about everything. The weather, the fire, the stupid songs her mother used to sing. It didn't matter what she said. He just needed to hear a voice. Silas watched all of this with a kind of wary confusion, like he couldn't quite believe it was working. But Jonah was gaining weight. His eyes were brighter. He cried now, real, angry, full-throated cries when he was hungry or tired. It was the most beautiful sound Clara had ever heard. On the 5th day, Silas came back from the trapline earlier than usual. Clara was at the table mashing boiled carrots into a thin paste, Jonah propped in her lap. "Storm's coming," Silas said, shaking snow off his coat. "Big one. We'll be snowed in for a few days, maybe a week." Clara glanced at the window. The sky had gone flat and gray, the kind of gray that meant serious weather. "Do we have enough supplies? Enough food? Enough wood, if we're careful?" He hung his coat on the peg by the door, then crossed to the table. "How is he?" "Good. He took almost half a bowl this morning." Silas reached out, hesitated, then gently touched Jonah's hand. The baby's fingers curled around his father's thumb, gripping tight. Silas went very still. "He knows you," Clara said softly. "Does he?" "Of course he does. You're his father." Silas stared at his son, something complicated and painful working across his face. "I didn't think—" He stopped, cleared his throat. "I didn't think he'd make it. I was so sure he was going to die that I'd already let him go." "But he didn't die." "No." Silas's voice was rough. "He didn't." Jonah yawned, his tiny mouth opening wide, and Silas let out a surprised huff that might have been a laugh. Clara smiled despite herself. "You want to hold him?" she asked. Silas pulled his hand back like she'd offered him a lit stick of dynamite. I'm not good at it." "Neither was I at first. You just have to try." He hesitated, then nodded. Clara stood and carefully transferred Jonah into his father's arms. Silas went rigid, holding the baby like he might shatter. "Relax," Clara said. "You're not going to break him." "Feels like I might." "You won't. Just support his head, like that." "Good." Silas adjusted his grip, and slowly his shoulders loosened. Jonah squirmed, then settled, staring up at his father with wide, curious eyes. "Hey," Silas said quietly. "Hey, Jonah." The baby blinked. Clara stepped back, giving them space. She busied herself at the stove, but she watched out of the corner of her eye as Silas stood there, rocking slightly, murmuring something too low for her to hear. It was clumsy and uncertain, but it was real. When Jonah started to fuss, Silas handed him back to Clara without argument. "I need to bring in more wood before the storm hits," he said, already heading for the door. Clara nodded, and he left. But something had shifted. She could feel it in the air, fragile and new. The storm hit that night. Wind screamed through the trees, rattling the shutters, driving snow against the cabin walls in thick, violent gusts. Clara lay on her pile of blankets near the fire. Jonah tucked against her chest and listened to the world try to tear itself apart outside. Silas was in his bed across the room, but she could tell he wasn't sleeping. His breathing was too controlled, too careful. "This happen often?" she asked into the darkness. "Once or twice a winter?" "Usually not this early." "How long do they last?" "Depends. 3 days, 5. Once it went on for 2 weeks. Clara tightened her hold on Jonah. 2 weeks trapped in this cabin, with a man she barely knew. 2 weeks with no way out if something went wrong. We'll be fine, Silas said, as if reading her thoughts. I've been through worse. Have you? He didn't answer right away. Then, Catherine died during a storm like this. I couldn't get down the mountain for a doctor. Couldn't do anything except watch her burn up with fever. Clara closed her eyes. I'm sorry. Yeah, me too. The wind howled, the fire crackled. Jonah slept, his small body warm and solid against her. Clara, Silas said. Yeah? Why'd you stay? After you found Jonah, you could have walked out, gone back to your uncle, told him the situation was impossible. Clara thought about that. Where would I have gone? She said finally. Back to a man who sold me for 6 coins? Back to a town where everyone looks at me like I'm a ghost? At least here, I'm useful. That's it? You stayed because you're useful? No. She paused, searching for the truth. I stayed because he needed me, and I needed... She stopped. Needed what? To matter again. Silas was quiet for a long time. Then, so softly she almost didn't hear it. You matter. Clara's throat tightened. She didn't respond, didn't know how to. Eventually, she heard Silas's breathing slow and deepen. He was asleep, or pretending to be. She lay there in the dark, holding Jonah, listening to the storm, and let herself believe just for a moment that maybe she could survive this. Maybe they all could. By the second day of the storm, the cabin felt smaller. The walls pressed in, the air thick and stale despite the fire. Claire kept busy, cooking, cleaning, caring for Jonah, but the restlessness itched under her skin. Silas paced. He wasn't good at sitting still, she'd learned. He'd check the fire, check the door, check the shutters, then do it all over again 20 minutes later. It would have been annoying if it wasn't so obviously how he dealt with stress. You're going to wear a hole in the floor, Clara said, not looking up from where she sat mending one of his shirts. Silas stopped mid-stride. I don't like being trapped. None of us do. You seem fine with it. I'm not. I'm just better at pretending. He snorted, almost amused, and dropped into the chair across from her. For a while, he just sat there, staring at the fire. Tell me about your husband, he said suddenly. Clara's needle paused mid-stitch. Why? Because we're stuck here with nothing to do, and I'm tired of my own thoughts. Fair enough. Clara set the mending in her lap. His name was Richard. We were married 2 years. He was kind, a little careless, but kind. How'd he die? Thrown from a horse, broke his neck. Silas winced. That's a bad way to go. Is there a good way? No, I guess not. He leaned back, crossing his arms. Did you love him? The question surprised her. Not because it was rude, they were past polite conversation, but because she had to think about the answer. I cared for him, she said slowly. I don't know if that's the same as love. We were young. We got married because it made sense, not because we couldn't live without each other. She looked up, met Silas's eyes. What about you and Catherine? I loved her. No hesitation. From the first time I saw her, she was... He stopped, his jaw working. She was everything I wasn't. Patient, gentle. She could calm Jonah with just her voice. I don't know how she did it. She sounds like a good mother. She was. I'm not a good father. You're learning. Am I? He laughed bitterly. I locked my son in a room and waited for him to die. That's not learning. That's failing. Clara set the mending aside and leaned forward. You were drowning, Silas. People who are drowning don't make good decisions. But you're not drowning anymore. Aren't I? No, you're treading water. That's different. He stared at her, something unreadable moving behind his eyes. Then Jonah whimpered from the cradle, and the moment broke. Clara stood, crossed to the cradle, and lifted him out. He was awake, his eyes bright and alert, his small hands reaching for her face. Hey, sweet boy, she murmured, kissing his forehead. You hungry? She carried him to the table and started preparing his food. Mashed vegetables, a little broth, soft bread soaked in milk. Silas watched her work, his expression thoughtful. You're good with him, he said. I've had practice. Still, you didn't have to... He gestured vaguely. You could have just done the work I paid for. Cooking, cleaning. You didn't have to care. Clara spooned a small amount of food into Jonah's mouth. He ate eagerly, making small pleased sounds. I don't know how to not care, she said quietly. Silas nodded slowly, like that made sense to him. Then he stood, walked over, and crouched beside her chair. Can I try? Clara blinked. Try what? Feeding him. She handed him the spoon without a word. Silas took it carefully, his large hands clumsy around the small utensil. He scooped up a bit of mashed carrot and offered it to Jonah. Jonah turned his head away. Silas frowned. He doesn't want it. He's being stubborn. Try again. Silas tried again. Jonah fussed, twisting in Clara's arms. Maybe he doesn't like me, Silas said, his voice flat. He likes you fine. He's just not used to you yet. Clara adjusted her hold on Jonah, angling him toward his father. Talk to him. Let him see your face. Silas hesitated, then leaned closer. Come on, Jonah. Just a little. It's good. I think. I don't know. I haven't tried it, but Clara made it, so it's probably fine. Despite herself, Clara smiled. Jonah stared at his father, then slowly opened his mouth. Silas slipped the spoon in, and Jonah ate. There, Clara said softly. See? Silas's face did something complicated. Relief, pride, grief, all tangled together. He fed Jonah another spoonful, then another, his movements growing more confident with each one. When the bowl was empty, Jonah yawned and nuzzled against Clara's shoulder, already half asleep. Silas set the spoon down, staring at his son like he'd just witnessed something miraculous. I did that, he said quietly. You did. He looked at Clara, and for the first time since she'd arrived, she saw something other than pain in his eyes. She saw hope. The storm lasted 4 days. By the time the wind finally died and the snow stopped falling, the cabin felt like a cocoon, warm, safe, separate from the rest of the world. Claire had stopped sleeping on the floor. On the second night, Silas had dragged a straw-stuffed mattress down from the loft and set it up in the corner for her. It wasn't much, but it was better than blankets on hard wood. They'd fallen into an easy rhythm. Silas would wake first, build up the fire, start the coffee. Claire would feed Jonah, then make breakfast, while Silas did whatever repairs or chores the cabin needed. They'd eat together, talking or not talking, and it didn't feel forced anymore. It just felt normal. On the 5th day, Silas dug a path to the shed and brought back fresh meat. Clara roasted it with wild onions and the last of the potatoes, and they ate until they were full. Jonah sat in Silas's lap, grabbing at his father's beard and laughing when Silas made exaggerated faces. He's strong, Silas said, wincing as Jonah's tiny fist yanked a handful of hair. He's getting there. Clara refilled Silas's coffee cup. Another few weeks and he'll be back to normal. Normal, Silas repeated, like he'd forgotten what that word meant. He looked down at his son, something soft and unguarded crossing his face. I didn't think I'd ever see him laugh again. You almost didn't. I know. His gaze lifted, met hers. I owe you more than 6 silver coins, Clara. You don't owe me anything. I do. I owe you his life. He paused, then, and maybe mine too. Clara's breath caught. She didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing, just looked at him across the table, this hard, broken man who was slowly learning how to be whole again. Jonah squirmed, reaching for the spoon on the table. Silas handed it to him, and the baby immediately stuck it in his mouth, gumming the metal with intense concentration. He's going to be trouble, Silas said, a smile pulling at the corner of his mouth. Clara laughed. It surprised her. The sound, the feeling. She hadn't laughed in months. All babies are trouble. Yeah, but he's worth it. He is. They sat there for a while, watching Jonah explore the spoon like it was the most fascinating object in the world. The fire crackled. The cabin was warm, and for the first time since Emma died, Clara felt something she'd thought was gone forever. She felt at peace. That night, after Jonah was asleep in his cradle and the fire had burned down to embers, Clara lay on her mattress and stared at the ceiling. She could hear Silas moving around on the other side of the room, settling into his bed. Silas? She said into the darkness. Yeah? Thank you. For the mattress. It's nothing. It's not nothing. He was quiet for a moment, then, You're not what I expected. What did you expect? I don't know. Someone beaten down, someone who'd just do what I told her and not ask questions. Sorry to disappoint. You didn't. He shifted, and she heard the creak of the bed frame. You're stronger than I am. That's not true. It is. You lost everything, and you're still standing. I lost everything, and He stopped. I gave up. Clara rolled onto her side, facing his direction even though she couldn't see him in the dark. You didn't give up. You just needed help. Same thing. No, it's not. Giving up is lying down and waiting to die. Asking for help is... She paused, searching for the right words. It's admitting you can't do it alone. That's not weakness. That's survival. Silas didn't respond for a long time. Then, so quietly she almost didn't hear. Thank you. Clara closed her eyes. You're welcome. She fell asleep to the sound of his breathing and the soft crackle of dying coals. The next morning, Silas announced he was going to check the trap line. The snow had stopped, the sky was clear, and he needed to see what the storm had done to his traps. I'll be gone most of the day, he said, pulling on his coat. Maybe into the evening. We'll be fine, Clara said, bouncing Jonah on her hip. Silas hesitated at the door, his hand on the latch. If something happens, nothing's going to happen. But if it does, Silas... She walked over, stood close enough to see the worry etched into the lines around his eyes. We'll be fine. Go. He nodded, then did something that surprised her. He reached out and gently touched Jonah's head, his big hand covering the baby's skull. Be good for Clara, he murmured. Jonah gurgled happily. Silas's gaze shifted to Clara, and for a moment they just looked at each other. Something passed between them. Understanding, maybe. Trust. Then he was gone, the door closing behind him, and Clara was alone with Jonah and the quiet cabin. She spent the morning cleaning, singing nonsense songs to Jonah while she worked. He was in a good mood, babbling and waving his arms, trying to grab everything within reach. She let him gum on a wooden spoon while she kneaded bread dough, laughing when he dropped it and immediately started crying like the world had ended. Dramatic, she told him, picking up the spoon and handing it back. You're very dramatic. By midday, the cabin was spotless. The bread was baking, and Jonah was napping in his cradle. Clara sat by the fire with a cup of tea, letting herself relax. And that's when she heard it. Hoofbeats. Her head snapped up. Someone was coming. She stood quickly, her heart suddenly racing. Silas wasn't due back for hours. And no one else knew they were here. No one should be coming. She crossed to the window, peered through the gap in the shutters, and saw him. Cyrus. Her uncle sat on his horse at the edge of the clearing, his face red from the cold, his eyes scanning the cabin. He looked angry. Clara's blood went cold. She stepped back from the window, her mind racing. Why was he here? What did he want? Jonah stirred in his cradle, whimpering softly. Clara moved to him instinctively, scooping him up, holding him close. A knock hammered against the door. Clara! Cyrus's voice, muffled but loud. I know you're in there. Open up. She didn't move. Clara, I need to talk to you. Open the door. Her hands tightened on Jonah. He started to cry, quiet, confused sounds. I'm not leaving until you open this door, Cyrus shouted. Clara's heart pounded. She looked around the cabin, calculating. The door was heavy, barred. He couldn't break through it. Not easily. But if he tried, if he really tried, the knock came again, harder this time. Clara, don't make this difficult. I'm here to help you. Help. The word made her stomach turn. She walked to the door, Jonah clutched against her chest, and spoke through the wood. What do you want? I want to talk to you, face to face. We can talk like this. A pause. Then, fine. I heard about the baby, about what you've been doing. Clara's breath caught. How? I ran into Granger down in Ridgeway 2 days ago. He told me. Silas had been in town? He hadn't mentioned that. So? She said. So I'm here to make sure you're all right, that he's treating you fair. He is. Claire, you don't owe him anything. If you want to leave, I can take you right now. No questions. I'm not leaving. Why not? He bought you like... Cyrus stopped himself. You don't have to stay here. You're not his property. I'm staying because I want to. Because of the baby, Cyrus said, and there was something ugly in his tone. You think you can replace Emma with someone else's child. Rage flared hot and sudden in Clara's chest. Get off this property. Clara, leave. Now. I'm trying to help you. You sold me! The words ripped out of her, raw and furious. You sold me for 6 coins and didn't look back. So don't stand there and pretend you care. Silence. Then Cyrus's voice, colder now. You're making a mistake. Maybe. But it's my mistake to make. She heard him move, heard the creak of his saddle as he mounted his horse. When this falls apart, and it will, don't come crying to me. I won't. The hoofbeats faded, and Clara stood there shaking, Jonah crying against her shoulder. She sank onto the chair, her legs weak, and tried to breathe. It took a long time for her hands to stop trembling. When Silas returned that evening, Clara was stirring stew over the fire, Jonah asleep in his cradle. Silas took one look at her face and stopped. What happened? Clara told him. All of it. The visit, the accusations, the threat. Silas's expression went dark. He came here? Yes. And he said... He stopped, his jaw clenching. I'll ride down there tomorrow and... No. Clara set the spoon down. Don't. He had no right. I know, but if you go after him, it'll just make things worse. He threatened you. He's angry. He'll get over it. Silas stared at her, then exhaled hard and dragged a hand through his hair. I should have told you I went to town. I didn't know he'd come up here. Why did you go? Supplies, medicine? I wanted to get things for Jonah, just in case. He crossed to the cradle, looked down at his sleeping son. I ran into your uncle at the general store. He asked how you were doing. I told him you were fine, that you were helping with Jonah. He looked up, met her eyes. I didn't think he'd take it the wrong way. Clara nodded slowly. It's not your fault. Feels like it is. It's not. Silas walked over, stood close enough that she could see the worry carved into his face. Do you want to leave? He asked quietly. If you do, I'll understand. I'll give you money, help you get somewhere safe. I'm not leaving. Clara, I'm not, she said firmly. I'm staying. For Jonah. For... She stopped, realizing what she'd almost said. Silas was very still. For what? She met his eyes. For you. The words hung in the air between them, fragile and impossible. Silas's throat worked. You don't owe me anything. I know. Then why? Clara looked at Jonah, then back at Silas. Because for the first time in 6 months, I don't feel like I'm drowning, and I think maybe you don't either. Silas stared at her, something raw and vulnerable flickering across his face. Then, slowly, carefully, he reached out and took her hand. His palm was rough, calloused, warm. I don't know what I'm doing, he said quietly. Neither do I. But I don't want you to leave. Then I won't. They stood there, hands clasped, the fire crackling between them. Jonah slept. The cabin was warm, and outside the world was cold and brutal and unforgiving. But inside, something new was growing, something neither of them had expected, something that felt dangerously close to hope. The hand-holding didn't last. Silas pulled away after a moment, clearing his throat, suddenly fascinated by the stew pot. Clara let him retreat. Whatever had passed between them was too new, too fragile to push. They ate dinner in a comfortable silence. Jonah propped between them in a nest of blankets, grabbing at everything on the table with sticky fingers. He'd started doing that, reaching for things, trying to put them in his mouth. Normal baby things. Things that made Clara's chest ache with relief every time she saw them. After dinner, Silas cleaned the dishes while Clara got Jonah ready for bed. She'd developed a routine. Warm water in a basin, a cloth to wipe him down, clean clothes that Silas had quietly started leaving out for her. The baby splashed and kicked, delighted by the water, and Clara found herself smiling despite the tension still coiled in her shoulders from Cyrus's visit. He likes that, Silas said from behind her. She glanced back. He was leaning against the table, arms crossed, watching them with an expression she couldn't quite read. He does, she agreed. I think he's part fish. Silas huffed something that might have been a laugh. He moved closer, crouched beside them. Catherine used to say the same thing. She'd spent an hour just letting him play in the water. Clara paused, the cloth still in her hand. Silas didn't talk about Catherine often. When he did, his voice always carried that same raw edge, like speaking her name opened something in him that hadn't healed yet. She sounds like she was patient, Clara said carefully. More patient than me. Silas reached out, let Jonah grab his finger. I'd get frustrated when he wouldn't settle. She'd sing to him. The song her mother taught her, I don't even remember the words anymore. Maybe Jonah does. Silas looked at her, startled. You think? Babies remember more than we give them credit for. Clara lifted Jonah out of the basin, wrapped him in a towel. Try singing something. See if he responds. I can't sing. Neither can I. He won't care. Silas stared at his son, uncertainty written across every line of his face. Then, hesitantly, he started humming. It was off-key, tuneless, barely more than a rumble in his chest. But Jonah went still, his wide eyes fixed on his father's face. Silas's humming faltered. He's staring at me. He's listening. I'm terrible at this. You're doing fine. Clara handed Jonah to him. Here, hold him while I clean up. Silas took his son awkwardly, settling him against his chest. Jonah made a small sound, not quite a cry, not quite a coo, and nestled closer. Silas's expression did something complicated, and he resumed humming, quieter now, almost like he didn't want Clara to hear. She busied herself emptying the basin, wringing out the cloth, giving them space. When she turned back, Jonah was asleep, his small body relaxed completely against his father. Silas sat frozen, like he was afraid to move and break whatever spell had been cast. You're a natural, Clara said softly. I'm not. You are. You just don't believe it yet. Silas looked up at her, and something in his gaze made her breath catch. Gratitude, maybe. Or something deeper, something she wasn't ready to name. Thank you, he said. For what? For not giving up on him. On me. Clara's throat tightened. I wouldn't know how to give up, even if I tried. I'm starting to see that. They put Jonah in his cradle together, both of them moving carefully, like they were handling something precious. Which they were. When the baby was settled and sleeping peacefully, Silas straightened and ran a hand through his hair. I need to go into town again tomorrow, he said. Clara tensed. Why? More supplies, and I need to talk to the sheriff. About Cyrus? About making sure he doesn't come back here. Silas's voice was flat, but she could hear the anger simmering underneath. He had no right to come to my property and harass you. Silas, don't make this worse. I'm not making anything worse. I'm making it clear that you're under my protection now. He met her eyes. You are, Clara. Whether you like it or not. She didn't know what to say to that. Part of her wanted to argue, to insist she didn't need protecting. But another part, the part that was still shaken from Cyrus's visit, felt something warm unfold in her chest at the certainty in Silas's voice. Just don't do anything stupid, she said finally. I'll try. Silas, I'll be smart about it. I promise. He grabbed his coat from the peg. I'm going to check the horses before bed. You should get some sleep. He left before she could respond. Clara stood there in the firelight, listening to his boots crunch through the snow outside, and wondered when everything had gotten so complicated. She woke in the middle of the night to the sound of Jonah crying. Not his usual fussy cry. Something sharper, more distressed. Clara was on her feet before she was fully awake, stumbling across the room to the cradle. Jonah was hot, too hot. His face was flushed, his small body rigid with discomfort. No, Clara breathed. No, no, no. She scooped him up, pressed her hand to his forehead. Fever. Not dangerously high yet, but climbing. Silas, she called out, her voice tight. She heard him bolt upright in bed. What's wrong? Fever. He's burning up. Silas was beside her in seconds, still half-dressed from sleep, his hair wild. He touched Jonah's cheek, and his face went pale. How bad? Bad enough. Clara's mind raced. We need to cool him down. Get me cold water and cloths. Clean ones. Silas didn't argue. He moved fast, grabbing the bucket by the door, disappearing outside. Clara carried Jonah to the table, unwrapping him from his blankets. His skin was slick with sweat, his breathing too fast. It's okay, she murmured, more to herself than to him. You're going to be okay. We're going to fix this. Silas returned with a bucket of snow, which he dumped into a pot and set by the fire to melt slightly. Cold water, not ice water. Clara dipped a cloth in it and began wiping Jonah down, working quickly but carefully. The baby whimpered, twisting away from the cold, but Clara kept going. What caused this? Silas asked, his voice rough. I don't know. Could be anything. Teething, a chill. Sometimes babies just spike fevers. Is he going to... Silas couldn't finish the sentence. He's going to be fine, Clara said firmly, even though her own fear was a living thing clawing at her ribs. We caught it early. We'll keep him cool, keep him hydrated, and he'll be fine. She didn't know if that was true, but she said it anyway because the alternative was unthinkable. They worked together through the night. Silas kept the water coming, kept the fire at the right temperature, warm enough to keep the cabin comfortable, but not so hot it made things worse. Clara stayed with Jonah, cooling him down, coaxing drops of water into his mouth, talking to him in a low, steady voice. "You're stronger than this," she told him. "You fought your way back once. You can do it again." Jonah's eyes cracked open, glassy and unfocused. He made a small sound, and Clara's heart twisted. "I know," she whispered. "I know it hurts, but you have to keep fighting." Silas sat across from her, his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped so tight his knuckles were white. He looked like a man waiting for an execution. "He's not going to die," Clara said, glancing at him. "You don't know that." "Yes, I do." "How?" "Because I won't let him." She said it with a conviction she didn't entirely feel, but Silas needed to hear it. "And neither will you." Silas's jaw worked. He reached out, rested his hand on Jonah's leg gently, like he was afraid his touch might hurt. "What do I do?" "You stay here. You don't give up, and you help me keep him alive." "I can do that." "I know you can." By dawn, the fever had broken. Jonah's temperature dropped back to normal. His breathing evened out, and he fell into a deep, exhausted sleep. Clara slumped in her chair, her body screaming with fatigue, her hands trembling from hours of tension. Silas let out a breath that sounded like it had been trapped in his chest all night. "He's okay." "He's okay," Clara echoed. They sat there in this gray morning light, too tired to move, too relieved to speak. Finally, Silas stood, walked over, and gently took Jonah from Clara's arms. "You need to sleep," he said. "So do you." "I will. After." He cradled Jonah against his chest, rocking slightly, and Clara saw the tremor in his hands. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Again," Clara shook her head. "You don't have to keep thanking me." "Yeah, I do." She was too tired to argue. She dragged herself to her mattress, collapsed onto it, and was asleep before she even pulled the blanket over herself. When she woke, it was late afternoon. The cabin was warm, the fire crackling, and Silas was at the stove, making something that smelled like bacon and onions. Jonah was in his cradle, awake and babbling to himself, playing with a wooden spoon. Clara sat up slowly, her body stiff and sore. "How long was I out?" 6 hours, maybe." Silas glanced back at her. "You needed it." "How's Jonah?" "Perfect. Ate a full bowl, no fever, acting like nothing happened." Silas's mouth twitched into something almost like a smile. "He's resilient." "He is." Clara stood, crossed to the cradle, and touched Jonah's forehead. Cool, normal. Relief flooded through her all over again. Jonah looked up at her and grinned, a wide, toothless, absolutely perfect grin. Clara's vision blurred. She blinked hard, swiped at her eyes, and smiled back. "Hey, troublemaker." Silas brought her a plate of food and a cup of coffee. She ate mechanically, too hungry to taste anything, while Silas sat across from her and watched Jonah with an intensity that bordered on obsessive. "You're staring," Clara said. "I'm making sure he's okay." "He's okay." "I know, Silas exhaled. "Last night scared the hell out of me." "Me too." "If you hadn't been here..." "But I was." Silas met her eyes. "What if you hadn't been? What if I'd still been alone and he'd gotten sick like that? I wouldn't have known what to do. I would have panicked, or worse, I wouldn't have even noticed until it was too late." Clara set down her fork. "But that didn't happen. You're not alone anymore. And Jonah's fine. Because of you. Because of both of us." She leaned forward. "You didn't fall apart last night, Silas. You helped. You did exactly what needed to be done. Give yourself some credit." Silas looked at her for a long moment, something complicated moving across his face. Then he nodded slowly. "Okay?" "Okay." They finished eating in silence. Afterward, Silas put on his coat and grabbed his rifle. "I'm still going to town," he said. "I'll be back by dark." Clara stood. "Be careful." "Always am." "Silas." He paused at the door, looked back. "Thank you," Clara said, "for last night, for staying calm." His expression softened. "You made it easy." And then he was gone. Clara spent the day cleaning, playing with Jonah, trying not to think about Silas in town confronting Cyrus or the sheriff or whoever else might cause problems. She told herself he could handle it. He was smart, capable, not prone to doing anything reckless. She almost believed it. Jonah was in a good mood, which helped. He babbled constantly, reaching for everything, trying to pull himself up on the edge of his cradle. Clara let him, holding his hands, marveling at how strong he'd gotten. A month ago, he'd been limp and dying. Now he was fighting to stand. "You're going to be walking before we know it," she told him, "and then we'll really be in trouble." Jonah laughed, a bright, bubbly sound that filled the cabin. Clara's heart clenched. She thought of Emma, the way she used to laugh just like that. The thought didn't hurt as much as it used to. It was still there, still sharp, but now it was layered with something else. Gratitude, maybe. That she'd gotten to hear that sound again, even if it was from a different child. The door opened just as the sun was setting. Silas stepped inside, snow dusting his shoulders, his face unreadable. "Well?" Clara asked. Silas closed the door, took off his coat, and sat heavily in the chair by the fire. "I talked to the sheriff, told him what happened. He said he'd have a word with Cyrus, make it clear he's not welcome here." "Will that work?" "Maybe. Depends on how stubborn your uncle is." Clara wrapped her arms around herself. "He won't let it go. He thinks he's helping me." "He's not." "I know that. You know that. But he doesn't see it that way." Silas leaned forward, his hands clasped between his knees. "If he comes back, I'll deal with him." "How?" "However I have to." The words hung heavy in the air. Clara wanted to argue, to tell him violence wasn't the answer, but she couldn't. Because deep down, she knew Cyrus wasn't going to listen to reason. He was the kind of man who believed he knew what was best for everyone around him, and he wouldn't stop until he got his way. "Let's hope it doesn't come to that," she said finally. Silas nodded, but the tension in his shoulders didn't ease. The weeks that followed settled into something almost normal. Silas ran his trap line, brought back pelts and meat, sold what he could in town. Clara kept the cabin, cooked, cared for Jonah, and slowly, so slowly she almost didn't notice, the weight she'd been carrying began to lift. Jonah thrived. He learned to sit up on his own, then to pull himself up on furniture. He babbled constantly, stringing together sounds that almost resembled words. Clara and Silas took turns playing with him, teaching him, celebrating every tiny milestone like it was a miracle. Because it was. One evening, after Jonah was asleep, Clara sat by the fire mending one of Silas's shirts. He was at the table, cleaning his rifle, the familiar rhythm of metal and oil filling the quiet. "Can I ask you something?" Clara said without looking up. "Sure." "Why did you buy me? I mean, really. You could have hired someone from town, or asked a neighbor for help." Silas was quiet for a long time. She thought maybe he wouldn't answer. Then, "I didn't want someone from town. Everyone there knew Catherine, knew me. They'd look at Jonah and see her, and I couldn't handle that." Clara's hand stilled on the fabric. "And neighbors," Silas continued, "they would have asked questions, offered advice, tried to help in ways I didn't want to be helped. I just wanted someone who'd do the work and leave me alone. And then I broke into the loft." "And then you broke into the loft," he agreed, something almost like amusement in his voice. "Turned out I didn't get what I paid for." "Sorry." "Don't be." He set down the rifle, met her eyes across the room. "I got something better." Clara's throat tightened. "Silas? I'm not good at this," he said, cutting her off. "Talking, saying what I mean. But I need you to know you saved us, both of us, and I don't know how to repay that." "You don't have to." "I want to." Clara set down the mending, stood, and crossed to the table. She sat in the chair across from him, close enough to see the firelight reflected in his eyes. "Then treat me like a person," she said quietly. "Not like someone you bought. Not like hired help. Just a person." Silas stared at her. "You think I don't?" "I think you're trying, but sometimes you look at me like you're still figuring out what I am." "That's because I am." He leaned back, ran a hand through his hair. "You're not what I expected, Clara. You're stronger, smarter, braver than I gave you credit for, and I don't know what to do with that." "You don't have to do anything. Just see me." "I do see you." His voice was rough. "That's the problem." Clara's breath caught. The air between them felt suddenly charged, heavy with something unspoken. Silas pushed back from the table, stood abruptly. I'm going to check the horses." He was out the door before Clara could respond. She sat there in the silence, her heart pounding, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Because something had happened. Something had shifted. And she didn't know if that was a good thing or a terrifying thing, probably both. The next morning, Silas was different. Not cold exactly, but distant. He spoke to her only when necessary, avoided her eyes, spent most of the day outside even though the weather was brutal. Clara didn't push. Whatever was going on in his head, he needed to work through it on his own. But it stung. More than she wanted to admit. By evening, she was furious. Not at him, at herself. For caring. For letting herself hope that maybe, just maybe, something could grow between them beyond necessity and shared grief. She was putting Jonah to bed when Silas finally came inside. He looked half frozen, snow clinging to his hair and coat, his face red from the cold. "You're going to catch your death out there," Clara said, not looking at him. "I needed to think." "You've been thinking all day." "I needed more time." Clara set Jonah in his cradle, tucked the blankets around him, then turned to face Silas. "If you regret what you said last night, just say so. Don't punish both of us by disappearing." Silas flinched. "I don't regret it." "Then what's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. He stopped, his jaw working. "This wasn't supposed to happen." "What wasn't?" "You." He gestured helplessly. "This. Caring about you." Clara's breath left her in a rush. "Silas, I loved Catherine," he said, his voice raw. "I loved her so much it nearly killed me when she died, and I swore I couldn't." He broke off, dragged a hand down his face. "But then you showed up, and you saved Jonah, and you stayed, and now I can't stop thinking about you. And I don't know what to do with that." Clara's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. "You don't have to do anything. Don't I?" "No." She crossed to him, stopped close enough to see the conflict written across every line of his face. "You don't owe me anything, Silas. Not gratitude, not anything else. If you want me to stay, I'll stay. If you want me to go, I'll go. But don't torture yourself over something that doesn't need to be complicated. Everything's complicated with you." "That's not true." "It is." He reached out, his hand hovering near her face, not quite touching. "You make me feel things I thought were dead, and I don't know if that's good or if I'm just trying to replace what I lost." Clara's chest ached. She understood that fear. She'd felt it herself every time she looked at Jonah and saw Emma's ghost. "I can't answer that for you," she said softly. "Only you know what you're feeling. But I can tell you this. I'm not Catherine. I'm never going to be Catherine. And if that's what you're looking for, you're going to be disappointed. I know you're not her." "Do you?" Silas's hand finally made contact, his fingers brushing her cheek so lightly she almost didn't feel it. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I do." They stood there inches apart, the fire crackling behind them. Clara could barely breathe. Every instinct told her to step back, to protect herself, to not let this go any further. But she didn't move. "Clara," Silas said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah? I don't want you to go." "Then I won't." His thumb traced the line of her jaw, gentle and uncertain. "But I don't know how to do this. Neither do I." She covered his hand with hers, held it against her face. "So we'll figure it out together." Silas let out a breath, and some of the tension drained from his shoulders. "Together. Together." He leaned down, and for a moment Clara thought he might kiss her. Her heart stuttered, but then Jonah made a sound from the cradle, a sleepy little whimper, and the moment broke. Silas stepped back, his hand falling away. Yeah. They moved apart, both of them suddenly awkward, uncertain. Clara busied herself stoking the fire while Silas checked on Jonah. The baby was fine, already settling back into sleep. When Clara finally turned around, Silas was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something fragile and new and terrifying. "Good night, Clara," he said. "Good night." She lay awake for hours after that, staring at the ceiling, replaying every word, every touch, every look. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, didn't know if Silas would wake up and regret everything, or if this thing between them would grow into something real. But for the first time in a long time, she let herself hope. And that was enough. The morning came too bright, too cold, the kind of winter day that made everything sharp-edged and unforgiving. Clara woke to find Silas already up, standing by the window with a cup of coffee, staring out at nothing. His shoulders were tense, his jaw set in that way that meant he'd been thinking too much. She sat up slowly, careful not to wake Jonah, who was still sleeping soundly in his cradle. "You're up early." Silas didn't turn around. "Couldn't sleep." "Regretting last night?" "No." He took a drink of his coffee. "Maybe. I don't know." Clara stood, wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, and crossed to the stove. She poured herself coffee and joined him at the window. Outside, the world was white and still, the kind of quiet that felt heavy. "Talk to me," she said. "There's nothing to talk about." "Silas." He finally looked at her, and she saw the conflict written all over his face. "I meant what I said last night, all of it, but saying it and living with it are two different things." "I know. Do you?" He set his cup down on the windowsill, ran both hands through his hair. "Because I don't think you understand what you're getting into here. I'm not an easy man, Clara. I'm angry most of the time. I don't know how to talk about what I'm feeling, and I've got a dead wife's ghost hanging over everything I do." "You think I don't have my own ghosts?" "I know you do, but that doesn't make this less complicated." Clara turned to face him fully. "Nothing worth having is ever simple. You taught me that when you bought me for 6 coins and I ended up saving your son's life. That wasn't simple, but we made it work. This is different. How? Because this," he gestured between them, "this could hurt both of us if it goes wrong, and it could save both of us if it goes right." Silas stared at her, something raw flickering in his eyes. Then Jonah woke with a cry, and the moment fractured. Clara went to him automatically, lifting him out of his cradle, checking his temperature, his color, all the small assessments she'd learned to do without thinking. "He's fine," she said over her shoulder. "Just hungry." Silas nodded, grabbed his coat. "I'm going to split more wood. It's barely dawn." "I know." He left before she could say anything else. Clara watched him go, frustration and understanding tangled up so tight in her chest she couldn't separate them. She knew what he was doing, running from something he couldn't control, trying to outwork the fear. She'd done the same thing after Emma died, scrubbing floors that were already clean, mending clothes that didn't need mending, anything to keep her hands busy and her mind blank. But eventually you ran out of things to clean. Eventually you had to sit with the fear and figure out what to do with it. She fed Jonah, changed him, played with him on the floor by the fire. He was crawling now, awkward, determined, getting stronger every day. He'd pull himself across the floor toward a toy or a spoon, triumph written all over his face when he reached it. Clara couldn't help but smile, even with worry gnawing at her. Silas came back an hour later, sweating despite the cold, his hands raw from work. He didn't say anything, just poured himself more coffee and sat at the table, staring into the cup like it held answers. Clara set Jonah in his cradle with a wooden spoon to chew on and sat across from Silas. "We can't keep doing this." "Doing what?" "Dancing around each other, saying things and then taking them back. It's not fair to either of us." Silas's jaw worked. "What do you want me to say?" "I want you to be honest. About what you want. About what you're afraid of." "I'm afraid of losing someone else I care about," he said flatly. "That honest enough for you?" Clara's breath caught. "Silas, I lost Catherine, and it almost destroyed me. If I let myself care about you, really care about you, and something happens, I don't think I'd survive it." His voice was rough, barely controlled. "So yeah, I'm afraid. I'm terrified, and I don't know how to get past that." Clara reached across the table, covered his hand with hers. "You don't get past it. You decide whether the fear is bigger than what you stand to gain. And what do I stand to gain? I don't know, maybe nothing. Maybe I'll turn out to be someone who disappoints you. Maybe this whole thing will fall apart in a month." She squeezed his hand. "Or maybe we'll figure out how to be happy. But we'll never know if you keep running." Silas looked at their joined hands, then up at her face. "You're asking me to take a leap I'm not sure I can make." "I'm not asking you to do anything. I'm just telling you I'm here. And I'm not going anywhere unless you tell me to. And if I can't promise you anything, then don't. We'll take it one day at a time." Silas let out a long breath. His hand turned under hers, their fingers lacing together. One day at a time. One day at a time. They sat like that for a while, the fire crackling, Jonah babbling to himself, the morning light slowly filling the cabin. It wasn't a solution. It wasn't even a plan. But it was something. The days that followed were easier. Not perfect. Nothing was ever perfect. But easier. Silas stopped retreating every time something felt too intimate. Clara stopped second-guessing every word out of her mouth. They moved around each other in the cabin like they'd been doing it for years instead of weeks, an easy rhythm that felt almost natural. Jonah turned 7 months old, then 8. He was sitting up completely on his own now, babbling in long strings of nonsense that almost sounded like conversation. Clara would sit with him on the floor, handing him wooden blocks, laughing when he'd knock them over and clap his hands in delight. Silas watched them sometimes, leaning against the doorframe or sitting at the table, his expression soft in a way Clara had never seen before. Once, she caught him smiling, really smiling, and it transformed his whole face. "What?" she asked. "Nothing, just, I forgot what this felt like." "What?" "Happy." He said it like the word was foreign, something he'd misplaced and just found again. Clara's chest tightened. "Me too." One afternoon, while Jonah napped, Clara was kneading bread dough when Silas came inside from checking the traps. He had snow in his hair, color in his cheeks, and something clutched in his hand. "Got something for you," he said. Clara wiped her hands on her apron. "For me?" He held out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "It's not much, but I thought—" He stopped, suddenly awkward. "Just open it." Clara unwrapped the cloth carefully. Inside was a hair comb, simple carved wood, smooth and polished. It was beautiful in its plainness, clearly made by hand. "I made it," Silas said quickly. "It's rough, and the teeth aren't perfectly even, but it's perfect." Clara ran her fingers over the smooth wood, felt the care in every groove. "Silas, this is... Thank you. I just thought you might want something that's yours. Not Catherine's old things. Not something I bought. Just something that's yours." Clara looked up at him, her vision blurring slightly. "No one's ever made me anything before." Silas shifted his weight, uncomfortable with her emotion but trying not to show it. "Well, now someone has." She set the comb down carefully on the table, then closed the distance between them and wrapped her arms around him. He went rigid for a second, surprised, then slowly relaxed, his arms coming up to hold her back. "Thank you," she whispered against his chest. "You already said that." "I'm saying it again." His hand came up to cup the back of her head, his fingers tangling in her hair. They stood like that for a long moment, holding each other in the quiet cabin, and Clara felt something settle in her chest, something that felt dangerously close to belonging. When they finally pulled apart, Silas's ears were red, and he wouldn't quite meet her eyes. I have more traps to check. It's almost dark. I'll be quick." He was out the door before she could argue. Clara stood there, holding the comb, smiling despite herself. For a man who claimed he didn't know how to show what he felt, he was doing a pretty good job. That night, after dinner, Silas did something unusual. He pulled out a worn deck of cards from a shelf and set them on the table. "You know how to play rummy?" he asked. Clara blinked. "A little. Richard tried to teach me once, but I was terrible at it." "Good. Then I'll actually have a chance at winning." They played 3 hands, Clara winning 2 of them despite her protests that she didn't know what she was doing. Silas accused her of hustling him, and she laughed so hard she nearly dropped her cards. Jonah watched from his cradle, his eyes tracking the movement of their hands, occasionally letting out a delighted squeal when one of them would slam down a card dramatically. "He likes this," Silas said, glancing at his son. "The noise, the back and forth." "He likes seeing you smile," Clara said. "You should do it more often." "I'm working on it. I've noticed." Silas dealt another hand, his movements practiced and easy. "Catherine and I used to play cards at night, after Jonah was asleep. It was nice. Normal." Clara picked up her cards, arranged them carefully. "You can talk about her, you know. I won't break." "I know. It's just..." He studied his hand. "I feel guilty sometimes. Being happy here. With you. Like I'm betraying her memory." "You're not." "How do you know?" "Because loving someone who's gone doesn't mean you can't love someone who's here." Clara set down a card. "Emma's gone, and I'll carry her with me for the rest of my life. But that doesn't mean I can't care about Jonah or you." Silas looked at her over his cards, and something shifted in his expression. "You care about me." It wasn't a question, but Clara answered anyway. "Yes." "Why?" "Because you're a good man trying to do right by his son. Because you're honest, even when it's hard. Because you made me a hair comb." She smiled slightly. "And because you're terrible at pretending you don't care back." Silas's mouth twitched. I'm not pretending anything. I know. He set his cards down, pushed back from the table, and crossed to her side. Claire's heart started pounding as he crouched beside her chair, his face level with hers. I don't know how to do this right, he said quietly. I'm probably going to mess it up, but I want... He stopped, searching for words. I want to try. With you. Claire's throat was tight. Okay. Okay. Yeah, okay. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull back if she wanted. She didn't. His lips brushed hers, soft and uncertain, more question than answer. Claire's hand came up to cup his face, and she kissed him back, gentle but sure. When they pulled apart, Silas rested his forehead against hers. That wasn't too fast? No. You sure? I'm sure. He smiled, a real full smile that made him look years younger. Then Jonah started fussing, and reality crashed back in. Silas stood, helped Clara to her feet, and they moved together to tend to the baby. It was such a small moment, so ordinary, but it felt like everything. 3 days later, everything went to hell. Clara was outside hanging laundry on the line Silas had strung between 2 trees when she heard the horses. 2 of them, moving fast through the snow. Her stomach dropped. She dropped the shirt she was holding and ran for the cabin. Silas was inside with Jonah, sharpening his hunting knife at the table. He looked up when she burst through the door, saw her face, and was on his feet instantly. What's wrong? Riders, 2 of them. Silas crossed to the window, peered out through the gap in the shutters. His whole body went rigid. It's your uncle, and he brought someone with him. Clara's blood went cold. She moved to the window, looked out, and felt her stomach turn. Cyrus was there, sitting tall on his horse, looking smug. And beside him was a man she didn't recognize, middle-aged, hard-faced, wearing a marshal's badge. No, she breathed. Silas's jaw clenched. Stay inside. Keep Jonah quiet. Silas, don't... But he was already out the door, rifle in hand. Clara scooped Jonah out of his cradle, held him close, and positioned herself where she could see through the window. Silas stood on the porch, the rifle held loosely, but ready. You're on my property, Cyrus. You've got 10 seconds to turn around. Cyrus didn't move. The marshal did, urging his horse forward a few steps. Mr. Granger, I'm Marshal William Hackett. I'm here on behalf of Mr. Cyrus Hale regarding his niece, Clara. She's not leaving. That's not your decision to make. Hackett's voice was calm, professional. Mr. Hale has raised concerns about Mrs. Hale's welfare and the legality of her current situation. Legality? Silas's voice was dangerous. I paid for her, fair and square. That's the issue, Mr. Granger. You can't buy a person. This is an 1850. Clara's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst. She pressed Jonah's face against her shoulder, trying to keep him calm, even though her own hands were shaking. She's here of her own free will, Silas said. Is she? Cyrus spoke up for the first time, his voice dripping with false concern. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've got her trapped up here in the middle of nowhere with no way out. That's not true, Silas growled. Then let me talk to her. Hackett dismounted, his movements slow and deliberate. If she tells me she wants to stay, I'll leave, but I need to hear it from her. Silas didn't move. Clara could see the tension in every line of his body, the way his finger rested near the trigger of the rifle. She made a decision. She handed Jonah to... No, there was no one else. She wrapped him in a blanket, held him tight, and opened the door. Clara, no! Silas started. It's fine. She stepped out onto the porch, Jonah in her arms, and faced her uncle and the marshal. I'm Clara Hale, and I'm staying here by choice. Hackett studied her, his gaze sharp. Mrs. Hale, your uncle claims you were coerced into this arrangement, that you're being held against your will. He's wrong. Are you? Cyrus's voice was hard. Because last time we spoke, you were locked inside that cabin taking care of another woman's child, while this man goes off and leaves you alone for days. That's my job. Your job? Cyrus laughed bitterly. Clara, he bought you, like livestock. Don't you see how wrong that is? I see how wrong it was for you to sell me. Clara's voice shook, but she held her ground. I see how wrong it was for you to come here and try to drag me back to a life where I was barely surviving. I'm better here. Jonah's better, and I'm not leaving. Hackett held up a hand. Mrs. Hale, I understand this is complicated, but Mr. Hale has a point about the legality. Then arrest him. Clara pointed at Cyrus. Arrest him for selling me, because that's what he did. He took 6 silver coins and handed me over like I was property. If anyone broke the law, it was him. Cyrus's face went red. I was trying to help you. You were trying to get rid of a problem. Claire's voice was steel now, hard and unyielding. I was a burden, and you found a way to profit off it, so don't stand there and pretend you're here out of concern. Hackett looked between them, his expression unreadable. Then he sighed. Mr. Hale, I'm going to need you to come with me. We're going to have a conversation about these arrangements you've been making. What? No, she's lying. She doesn't sound like she's lying. Hackett mounted his horse again. Mrs. Hale, if you change your mind, you can find me in Ridgeway. But as far as I'm concerned, you're free to stay here if that's what you want. It is. Hackett tipped his hat, then looked at Cyrus. Let's go. She's making a mistake. That's her right. Hackett's voice was firm. Move along, Mr. Hale. Cyrus stared at Clara, fury and something else. Hurt, maybe, flickering across his face. When this falls apart, don't come crying to me. I won't. He yanked his horse around and rode off, Hackett following at a slower pace. Clara stood on the porch, Jonah heavy in her arms, and watched until they disappeared into the trees. Only then did her legs start shaking. Silas was at her side instantly, his hand on her back, steadying her. You all right? No, yes, I don't know. She looked up at him. Did I just make everything worse? No, you made it clear where you stand. He took Jonah from her gently, held his son against his chest. That was brave. It was stupid. If Hackett decides to press charges, he won't. You heard him. He's more concerned with Cyrus than with us. Clara leaned against the porch railing, trying to slow her racing heart. What if Cyrus comes back? He won't. Not after that. Silas's voice was certain. And if he does, I'll handle it. How? However I have to. Clara looked at him, at the hard set of his jaw, the protective way he held Jonah. She believed him, and that should have scared her, but it didn't. It just made her feel safe. Come on, Silas said softly. Let's get inside. It's cold. They went back into the cabin, and Silas barred the door. Clara sank into a chair, her whole body trembling with delayed adrenaline. Silas set Jonah in his cradle, then pulled another chair close to Clara's and sat down, his knees almost touching hers. You meant what you said out there, he said. About staying. Yes. Why? Clara met his eyes. Because this is where I belong. With you. With Jonah. This is my home now. Silas's throat worked. He reached out, took her hand, and held it like it was something precious. I don't deserve you. Probably not, she smiled slightly. But you're stuck with me anyway. Good. They sat there in the quiet cabin, hands joined, Jonah babbling softly to himself. Outside, the world was cold and hostile and full of people who wanted to tear them apart. But inside, they were safe. They were together. And that was all that mattered. That night, after Jonah was asleep and the fire had burned down to coals, Clara lay on her mattress and stared at the ceiling. She could hear Silas breathing across the room, slow and steady, and she wondered if he was asleep or just pretending. Silas, she whispered. Yeah? Thank you for standing with me today. I'll always stand with you. The certainty in his voice made her chest ache. I know. Clara? Yeah? I'm glad you stayed. Me too. Silence settled over them again, but it was a comfortable silence now. The kind that came from understanding each other without needing to fill every gap with words. Clara closed her eyes and let herself drift. And for the first time since Emma died, she fell asleep without crying. Progress. Winter deepened into February, and the cabin became a world unto itself. Snow piled high against the walls, the wind howled through the pines, and the three of them, Clara, Silas, and Jonah, existed in a bubble of warmth and routine that felt almost sacred. Almost. Because Clara knew better than to trust peace. She'd learned that lesson with Emma, with Richard. With every loss that had taught her the world didn't care about your plans. So she stayed watchful, even as the days passed without incident. Even as Cyrus stayed away and the marshal never returned. Silas noticed. Of course he did. He'd gotten good at reading her silences. You keep looking at the door, he said one morning while she was mixing batter for Johnny cakes. Clara didn't deny it. I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop. There is no other shoe. There's always another shoe. Silas set down the trap he was mending and crossed to where she stood. He didn't touch her, but he was close enough that she could feel the heat from his body. Cyrus isn't coming back. The marshal made it clear he's got no legal ground to stand on. We're safe. For now. For always. His voice was firm. I won't let anyone take you or Jonah. You understand me? Clara wanted to believe him, but belief required a kind of trust she'd lost somewhere along the way. You can't promise that. Watch me. She looked up at him then, saw the absolute certainty in his face, and felt something crack open in her chest. Silas, I mean it, Clara. Whatever comes, we'll handle it together. He reached out, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. You're not alone anymore. Stop acting like you are. The words hit harder than they should have. Clara's eyes burned, but she blinked the tears back. I'm trying. I know. His thumb brushed her cheekbone. Keep trying. Jonah chose that moment to bang his wooden spoon against the floor, demanding attention, and they both laughed. The tension broke, and Clara went back to her batter, while Silas scooped up his son and tossed him gently in the air, earning delighted shrieks. It was such a normal moment, such an ordinary piece of domesticity, and it terrified Clara how much she wanted it to last. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Silas had gone into town for supplies, something he did every 2 weeks now, without fail. Clara had stopped worrying about it. He was always back by evening, and he always brought something small for her. Last time, it was a tin of tea. The time before that, a spool of blue thread. This time, he came back with his face like stone. Clara was feeding Jonah at the table when Silas walked in. She took one look at him and stood. What happened? He didn't answer, just pulled a folded piece of paper from his coat and set it on the table. Clara picked it up with shaking hands. The handwriting was unfamiliar, spidery and cramped. She read it once, then again, her heart sinking with each word. Mr. Granger, this letter serves as formal notice that I, Cyrus Hale, am claiming guardianship of the minor child currently in your possession, as I am the rightful blood relation of his late mother through marriage to her cousin. I have consulted with legal counsel and have been advised that your claim to the child is invalid, as you obtained his caretaker through illegal means. I will be arriving to collect the child within the fortnight. Failure to comply will result in involvement of territorial authorities. Cyrus Hale. Clara's hands were shaking so badly she had to set the letter down. He can't do this. He's trying. Silas's voice was flat, dangerous. And he might succeed. Jonah's your son, but Catherine was Cyrus's, cousin once removed? I don't even know. But if he can prove any blood relation, and if he can convince a judge that I'm unfit... Silas stopped, his jaw working. He could take him. No, Clara's voice was steel. Absolutely not. Clara, no. She picked up Jonah, held him against her chest like she could shield him from the world through sheer will. He's not taking this baby. I don't care what legal argument he makes. Jonah belongs here. Silas crossed to her, put his hands on her shoulders. I know. But we need to be smart about this. If we fight him the wrong way, we could lose everything. Clara looked up at him, saw the fear behind the anger, and felt her own rage crystallize into something colder, more focused. Then we fight him the right way. How? I don't know yet, but we figure it out. She shifted Jonah to one hip. When did you get this? Posted at the general store. The clerk said Cyrus left it yesterday. So we have 2 weeks. Less than that. He said within the fortnight, but he could show up tomorrow if he wanted. Clara's mind was racing. What if we left, just packed up and disappeared? Where would we go? I don't have that kind of money. And winter travel with a baby. Silas shook his head. We wouldn't make it 20 miles. Then we stay and we fight. Against what? The law? A blood relation claim? Clara, I don't even know if I have legal standing as his father. Catherine and I... He stopped, his face going red. We weren't married. Not officially. Clara's breath caught. What? We had a ceremony. Up here, just us and a traveling preacher who came through. But we never filed the paperwork. Catherine didn't care about that kind of thing, and I didn't think it mattered. His voice cracked. But it matters now. So Jonah is, legally, probably considered a bastard, which means Cyrus has a stronger claim than I do. Silas turned away, slammed his fist against the wall. I was so stupid, so careless. Clara's mind was spinning. No marriage certificate meant Silas had no legal claim to his own son, which meant Cyrus could argue he was the closest legitimate relation, which meant, wait. She set Jonah in his cradle, turned to face Silas. What if we got married? Silas went very still. What? You and me. If we got married, I'd be Jonah's legal mother, and Cyrus couldn't claim guardianship over both of us. Clara, that's not how... Isn't it? She crossed to him, grabbed his arm. Think about it. If we're married, I have legal standing as his mother, and Cyrus can't prove you're an unfit father if you've got a wife who's been caring for the child. It strengthens your position. Silas stared at her like she'd suggested they burn the cabin down. You want to marry me to win a legal argument? I want to marry you to save Jonah. She held his gaze. But also because I want to, if you'll have me. The silence stretched so long Clara thought she might scream. Then Silas let out a breath that sounded like it had been punched out of him. You're serious? Completely. Clara, we don't have to do this. There are other ways. Name one that works as well as this. He couldn't. She could see him trying, see the arguments forming and dying on his tongue. Finally, he said, I don't want you to marry me out of obligation. I'm not. Aren't you? Clara took his face in her hands, forced him to look at her. Listen to me. I care about you. I care about Jonah. Us, it's not just convenient anymore. It's real. And I want it to be real in the eyes of the law, too. So when Cyrus comes for us, we can stand together and tell him to go to hell. Silas's eyes searched hers. You're sure? I've never been more sure of anything. He kissed her then, hard and desperate, and full of everything he couldn't say. When they broke apart, his forehead rested against hers. Okay. Okay? Yeah, let's get married. Clara laughed, the sound half hysterical. That's the least romantic proposal I've ever heard. You want romance? I can... No. She kissed him again, softer this time. I just want you. They rode down to Ridgeway the next morning, all three of them. Silas had rigged a sling for Jonah that kept him strapped to Clara's chest, and they bundled him in so many blankets he looked like a small, grumpy bear. The trip took 4 hours through heavy snow, and by the time they reached town, Clara's fingers were numb and her face burned from the cold. The preacher was a thin man with kind eyes who didn't ask too many questions. He married them in his parlor, with his wife and the town clerk as witnesses. The ceremony took less than 10 minutes. Clara wore her only decent dress, and Silas wore the cleanest shirt he owned. Jonah slept through the whole thing. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Silas kissed her like they were the only two people in the world. Clara felt something settle in her chest, something that felt like permanence. They filed the marriage certificate at the territorial office, making sure every piece of paperwork was in order. Then they visited the marshal. Marshal Hackett listened to their story, read the letter from Cyrus, and leaned back in his chair. So you're telling me Cyrus Hale is trying to claim guardianship of a child who has a living father and a now legal mother? That's exactly what we're telling you, Silas said. Hackett snorted. He's an idiot, and he's going to lose. Relief flooded through Clara so fast she felt dizzy. You're sure? Ma'am, I've seen a lot of custody disputes in my time, and this one's cut and dry. The boy has 2 living parents who are married and capable of caring for him. Cyrus Hale can argue blood relation all he wants, but the law doesn't favor distant cousins over actual parents. He pushed the letter back across the desk. When he shows up, you tell him to come see me. I'll explain it to him in terms he can understand. Thank you, Clara breathed. Don't thank me. You two did the hard part. Hackett stood, shook Silas's hand. Congratulations on your marriage, by the way. They left the marshal's office with lighter steps. Silas kept his hand on Clara's back as they walked to the general store, and when she looked up at him, he was smiling. What? She asked. Nothing, just, I have a wife now. That's strange to say. Strange good or strange bad? Strange good. He pulled her closer. Very good. They bought supplies, flour, salt, coffee, and a small bag of peppermints that made Jonah's eyes go wide when he saw them. Then they started the long ride home. The sun was setting by the time they reached the cabin. Silas helped Clara down from the horse, taking Jonah from her so she could stretch her aching muscles. Inside, the fire had died to embers, and the air was frigid. I'll get the fire going, Silas said. You get Jonah warm. Clara unwrapped the baby, checked him over thoroughly. His cheeks were red from the cold, but he was alert and babbling, grabbing at her hair with sticky fingers. She laughed, kissed his forehead, and settled into the chair by the fireplace. Silas got the fire roaring in minutes, his movements practiced and efficient. When he was done, he sat on the floor beside Clara's chair, his back against her legs, and stared into the flames. "We did it," he said quietly. "We did. I have a wife and a son, and Cyrus can't touch either of you." Clara ran her fingers through his hair, felt him relax under her touch. "We're safe. For now. For always." She used his own words from that morning, and he looked up at her with something soft and vulnerable in his eyes. "I love you," he said. "I should have said it before, but I'm saying it now. I love you, Clara." Her throat closed up. She'd hoped for those words, but hearing them still hit like a physical blow. "I love you too." "Good." He reached up, took her hand, pressed a kiss to her knuckles. "Because you're stuck with me now, legally." Clara laughed, the sound watery. "Best decision I ever made." They stayed like that for a long time, Clara in the chair, Silas on the floor, Jonah dozing in Clara's arms. The fire crackled, the wind howled outside, and inside they were warm and safe and together. Cyrus arrived 9 days later. Clara heard the horse first, then saw him through the window. Alone this time, no marshal, just him and his anger. Silas was outside chopping wood, and Clara watched as Cyrus rode right up to him, dismounted, and started shouting. She couldn't hear the words, but she didn't need to. She could see the fury in Cyrus's gestures, the way he stabbed his finger at Silas's chest. Could see Silas standing there, unmoved, his axe held loosely at his side. Clara wrapped Jonah in a blanket, held him tight, and stepped out onto the porch. "No right to marry her without my permission," Cyrus was yelling. "She's my niece, my responsibility." "She's my wife," Silas said flatly, "and she's not your responsibility anymore." Cyrus's face was purple with rage. "You manipulated her. I married her. There's a difference. This is about the boy, isn't it? You're using her to keep him. I'm keeping him because he's my son." Silas's voice was dangerously calm. "And Clara's his mother, legally, which means you have no claim. The marshal already told you that, but I'll say it again, you have no claim." Cyrus's gaze snapped to Clara on the porch. "Is that true? You married him?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because I love him. Because I love Jonah. Because this is my home." "Your home?" Cyrus laughed bitterly. "Clara, he bought you. 6 silver coins. You're deluding yourself if you think this is anything more than what?" Clara's voice was hard. "Than a transaction? Maybe it started that way, but it's not anymore. I chose this. I chose him. And I'd make the same choice 100 times over." Cyrus stared at her, something like hurt flickering across his face. "I was trying to help you." "By selling me?" "By giving you a place to go after your husband died and you had nothing left. I took you in, Clara. I fed you. And this is how you repay me. You took me in because you felt obligated, and you got rid of me the first chance you got." Clara descended the porch steps, stood beside Silas. "If you'd really cared, you would have asked me what I wanted. You never did." Cyrus's jaw worked. "And what about the boy? You think you can just play house and pretend he's yours?" "He is mine." Clara's voice didn't waver. "I'm the one who saved his life when he was dying. I'm the one who's been with him every day since. I'm his mother in every way that matters." "You're not his blood. Neither are you." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Cyrus opened his mouth, closed it, then turned to Silas. "You're making a mistake, both of you. This won't last. And when it falls apart, don't expect me to pick up the pieces." "We won't," Silas said. Cyrus stared at them for another long moment, then climbed back on his horse. "You deserve each other," he spat, and rode off. They watched him disappear into the trees. Then Clara let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding and leaned against Silas. His arm came around her, solid and reassuring. "That's done then," he said. "That's done. You okay?" Clara thought about it, thought about the uncle who'd sold her, the life she'd left behind, the losses that had brought her here. "Yeah," she said finally. "I'm okay." Silas kissed the top of her head. "Come on, let's go inside. It's freezing." They went back into the cabin and Silas barred the door. Clara set Jonah in his cradle and stood there, staring at the baby, at this perfect, impossible child who'd brought her back to life. "He's going to be fine," Silas said, coming to stand beside her. "I know. We're all going to be fine." Clara looked up at him, this hard, broken man who'd learned how to be gentle, who'd learned how to love again. "I know that too." Silas pulled her close, and they stood there, watching Jonah sleep, the fire warming their backs. Outside, the world was cold and unforgiving, but inside they'd built something worth protecting, something worth fighting for. The rest of winter passed without incident. Cyrus never came back. The marshal sent word that the guardianship claim had been formally dismissed, and life settled into a rhythm that felt almost ordinary. Jonah took his first steps in March, wobbling across the cabin floor with his arms out for balance. Clara and Silas both cheering him on like he'd accomplished something miraculous, which, in a way, he had. 6 months ago, he'd been dying. Now he was thriving. Clara taught him to say mama, and the first time he said it clearly, she cried for an hour. Silas taught him to clap his hands and make silly faces, and the cabin was constantly filled with the sound of Jonah's laughter. In April, the snow finally melted, and spring crept up the mountain. Clara planted a garden behind the cabin, vegetables, herbs, a few flowers because she wanted something beautiful. Silas built her a fence to keep the deer out and a bench to sit on when the work got to be too much. They were happy. Not in some perfect storybook way. There were still hard days, days when Clara would see something that reminded her of Emma and have to step outside to cry. Days when Silas would grow quiet and distant, lost in memories of Catherine. Days when Jonah would scream for hours for no reason, and they'd both be exhausted and short-tempered. But they were happy. Because happiness wasn't the absence of pain. It was choosing to build something good in spite of it. One evening in May, after Jonah was asleep, Clara and Silas sat on the porch watching the sun set. The air was warm, the sky painted in shades of pink and gold, and Clara felt a peace she hadn't known was possible. "I've been thinking," Silas said. Clara glanced at him. "About what?" "About adding on to the cabin, making it bigger. Maybe another room for Jonah and—" He paused. "Maybe a room for other children, if that's something you'd want." Clara's breath caught. "You want more children?" "I want whatever you want. But yeah, if you'd be willing." He looked at her vulnerable in a way he rarely was. "I know Jonah's not Emma, and any other children wouldn't be either, but they'd be ours," Clara finished softly. "Yours and mine." "Yeah." Clara took his hand, laced their fingers together. "I'd like that. Not right away, maybe, but someday." Silas smiled, relief washing over his face. Someday. They sat there as the sun dipped below the mountains, painting the world in shadow and light. And Clara thought about the path that had brought her here. The grief, the loss, the desperate, impossible choices. Being sold for 6 silver coins to a stranger who didn't want her, finding a dying baby and refusing to let him go. Falling in love with a man who'd forgotten how to hope. It hadn't been easy, it hadn't been clean or simple or anything like what she'd imagined her life would be. But it was hers, and it was real, and it was enough. "Clara," Silas said quietly. "Yeah?" "Thank you." "For what?" "For staying, for fighting, for—" He stopped, searching for words. "For choosing us when you didn't have to." Clara leaned her head against his shoulder. "I didn't choose you because I had to. I chose you because I wanted to. There's a difference." "I know." He kissed her temple. "I'm just glad you did." They stayed on the porch until the stars came out, until the night air turned cold enough that they had to go inside. Silas checked on Jonah while Clara banked the fire for the night. Then they climbed into bed together, the bed they'd started sharing a month ago, the bed that was too small but somehow always felt just right. Silas pulled her close, his arm around her waist, her back against his chest. "Good night, wife." Clara smiled in the darkness. "Good night, husband." She closed her eyes and let sleep take her. And in the morning, they'd wake up and do it all over again. The cooking, the cleaning, the caring for Jonah, the small moments of joy, the occasional arguments, the quiet comfort of being known. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. And sometimes that was all anyone needed. Not a perfect life, not an easy one. Just a life worth living, built piece by piece from the broken things left behind. A life chosen, not given. A life earned through courage and stubbornness and the refusal to give up when everything seemed lost. Clara had been sold for 6 silver coins, but she'd bought herself back with something far more valuable. Her will to survive, her capacity to love. her determination to make something beautiful out of the wreckage. And in the end, that made all the difference. Because love, real love, the kind that lasted, wasn't about grand gestures or perfect timing. It was about showing up every day, even when it was hard. It was about choosing each other, again and again, in 1,000 small ways. It was about building a home not in a place, but in each other. Clara Granger had learned that lesson the hard way, but she'd learned it well, and she wouldn't trade it for anything.